My name is Marcus Ellington, and I'm 48 years old. For 19 years, I dedicated my life to Stanton and Cole Enterprises, a mid-sized consulting firm based in downtown Chicago. I believed that loyalty, hard work, and delivering results would speak louder than office politics. I was wrong. I started there fresh out of Northwestern Business School in 2005, 28 years old, and hungry to prove myself. Over the years, I climbed from junior analyst to senior vice president of strategic partnerships. I had a corner office on the 32nd floor with a view of Lake Michigan. My annual salary was $275,000, plus bonuses that could reach another $150,000 in good years. Not bad for a kid from Peoria who grew up in a two-bedroom house with parents who both work factor jobs. The company specialized in corporate restructuring and merger advisory services. We weren't Goldman Sachs, but we had carved out a solid niche in the Midwest market. Our clients trusted us because we delivered. And for nearly 2 decades, I was one of the main reasons why. If you enjoy stories of cold-blooded revenge and gripping plot twists, like this video, and subscribe to the channel now. There are brand new, unreleased stories here every day, each one more intense than the last. Richard Halverson became CEO in 2019. At 58, he was everything I wasn't: politically savvy, charming with investors, and ruthless when it suited him. He had silver hair that he kept perfectly styled, wore $1,000 suits, and drove a black Mercedes S-Class worth over $100,000. I respected his business acumen, but I never fully trusted him. There was something in his eyes during board meetings, a calculating coldness that made me uncomfortable. The opportunity that changed everything came in January of 2024. Pinnacle Tech, a software company based in Austin, was looking to acquire a smaller firm to expand their operations into the financial services sector. The total deal value was just over $1 billion, the largest merger our company had ever handled. Richard saw dollar signs. The commission alone would be worth $12 million to Stanton and Cole. He assigned me to lead the due diligence process. For 6 months, I worked 16-hour days, reviewing financial statements, conducting management interviews, and coordinating with lawyers from both sides. I flew to Austin 9 times, spending countless hours in conference rooms that smelled like stale coffee in desperation. My wife, Sarah, barely saw me during those months. Our 15-year-old daughter, Emma, started calling me the ghost dad because I was never home for dinner. But I didn't complain. This was what I lived for: the complex dance of corporate negotiations, the satisfaction of solving problems that others couldn't handle. I was good at my job, and I knew it. The Pinnacle Tech executives respected me. Their CFO, Janet Morrison, once told me over drinks at the Four Seasons in Austin that I was the most thorough analyst they'd ever worked with. Everything was proceeding smoothly. The merger was scheduled to close in mid-August 2024, just 6 weeks away. Both companies had signed letters of intent. The regulatory approvals were in place. I had personally verified every aspect of the deal structure, from the tax implications to the employee retention packages. That's when Richard decided I was a problem. On a Tuesday morning in early July 2024, I was in my office reviewing the final contract amendments when my computer chimed with a new email. The sender was Richard's assistant, Patricia Wells. The subject line read, "Employment Status Update." I opened it, expecting some routine HR communication about vacation policies or the company picnic. Instead, I found 4 sentences that would change my life forever. "Dear Mr. Ellington, effective immediately, your employment with Stanton and Cole Enterprises has been terminated. Please collect your personal belongings and surrender your company equipment to security before leaving the building today. A severance package will be discussed separately. Yours truly, Patricia Wells, Executive Assistant to the CEO." I read it 3 times. Then I looked at the timestamp, 9:47 a.m. I glanced at my watch, 9:52 a.m. 5 minutes. That's how long it took for 19 years of my life to be reduced to corporate boilerplate. No phone call, no meeting, no explanation. Just an email that felt as cold as a Chicago winter. I sat there, staring at my computer screen, feeling like I'd been punched in the gut. The office continued its normal rhythm around me. Phones ringing, printers humming, colleagues discussing weekend plans. Nobody knew that my world had just collapsed in the span of 5 minutes. My first instinct was to storm into Richard's office and demand an explanation. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the years of corporate experience, or maybe it was the survival instinct that kicks in when you realize you're under attack. Either way, I closed my laptop and took a deep breath. I walked to Richard's office. His door was closed, but through the glass partition, I could see him on a conference call, gesturing animatedly with his hands. Patricia sat at her desk outside, typing away as if nothing had happened. When she saw me approaching, her face went pale. "Is he available?" I asked calmly. He's in a very important call with Pinnacle Tech," she stammered. "Maybe later this afternoon." "I see." I nodded and smiled. "No problem. I'll wait." I sat in one of the leather chairs outside his office and pulled out my phone. For 20 minutes, I watched Richard through the glass. He was animated, confident, probably discussing deal points with the Pinnacle executives. He glanced at me once, and I saw something flicker across his face. Was it guilt? Fear? I couldn't tell. When he finally emerged from his office, straightening his tie, he looked surprised to see me still sitting there. "Marcus, I heard you got some news today," he said, his voice carrying that fake concern that executives master over the years. "I did," I replied, standing up. 19 years, Richard. I think I deserved better than an email from your assistant." He glanced around the reception area, conscious of the other employees nearby. "Let's talk in my office." We walked in, and he closed the door behind us. His office was twice the size of mine, with a mahogany desk that probably cost more than most people's cars. On the wall behind him hung his MBA diploma from Wharton and several photos of him shaking hands with various politicians and business leaders. "Look, Marcus, these decisions are never easy," he began, settling into his executive chair. "But with the Pinnacle merger moving forward, we need to restructure the team, bring in some fresh perspectives." "Fresh perspectives," I repeated. "Is that what you call it?" The board felt it was time for a change in leadership on this project. I almost laughed. "The board, Richard? I've been in every board meeting for the past 3 years. Half of them don't even understand what we do here." His jaw tightened slightly. "The decision has been made. Your severance package will be generous, 6 months' salary, plus accrued vacation time. Patricia will have the paperwork ready by tomorrow." 6 months' salary. That was it. After 19 years of building relationships, closing deals, and making this company millions of dollars, I was worth 6 months' pay. "I understand," I said quietly. He looked surprised at my calm response. "Good. I'm glad you're taking this professionally." "Of course. I've learned a lot working here." I stood up and extended my hand. "I wish you and the company all the best with the Pinnacle deal." He shook my hand, relief visible on his face. "I appreciate that, Marcus. I really do." I walked back to my office and began packing my personal items. 20 minutes later, I was carrying a cardboard box to the elevator, past colleagues who avoided eye contact because word travels fast in corporate environments. The security guard, Dave Martinez, walked me to my car. We'd chatted hundreds of times over the years about his grandson's baseball games. "Sorry about this, Mr. Ellington," he said as I loaded the box into my Honda Accord. "This doesn't seem right." "Don't worry about it, Dave. Things have a way of working out." That evening, I sat at my home office in our house in Naperville, staring at the box of belongings I'd brought from work. Sarah was making dinner in the kitchen, and I could hear Emma practicing piano upstairs. Normal family sounds, but nothing felt normal anymore. I opened my laptop and began going through the files I'd accumulated over the years. Most executives keep copies of important documents on personal drives. It's not technically allowed, but it's standard practice for anyone who's been burned before by corporate politics. I had gigabytes of data spanning nearly 2 decades. As I scrolled through folders, something caught my attention. It was a folder labeled Pinnacle Internal Communications that I'd created months earlier. Inside were email threads, recorded phone conversations, and meeting notes that painted a very different picture of the merger than what had been presented to the board and shareholders. There were emails between Richard and Pinnacle CEO David Chun, discussing eliminating potential obstacles to the merger. There was a recorded conference call where Richard had explicitly stated that certain senior employees would need to be moved aside before the deal could proceed smoothly. Most interesting was a series of text messages between Richard and his brother-in-law, who happened to be a major shareholder in Pinnacle Tech. They had discussed how Richard would receive a $2.1 million personal bonus, separate from the company's commission, once the merger was complete. This bonus was contingent on the deal closing without any complications or delays. Suddenly, my termination made perfect sense. Richard hadn't fired me because of restructuring or fresh perspectives. He'd fired me because I knew too much about the deal's irregularities, and he couldn't risk me raising questions that might delay or derail the merger. My job, my loyalty, my 19 years of service, none of it mattered compared to his personal payday. I leaned back in my chair and smiled for the first time in hours. Richard thought he'd eliminated a problem. What he'd actually done was create a much bigger one. The next morning, I woke up at my usual time, 6:30 a.m. But instead of rushing to get dressed for work, I made coffee and sat on our back porch. It was a beautiful July morning in Naperville. The birds were singing, and my neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, was already working in her garden. For the first time in months, I had nowhere urgent to be. Sarah found me there an hour later, still in my pajamas, reading the Wall Street Journal on my iPad. "How are you feeling?" she asked, settling into the chair beside me. "Surprisingly good," I said, and I meant it. I've been thinking about what happened yesterday, and I realized Richard may have done me a favor. She raised an eyebrow. "A favor, Marcus? He fired you by email." "He did, and in doing so, he made a very expensive mistake." I didn't elaborate, and she didn't push. Sarah had learned over the years that when I had that particular tone in my voice, calm but determined, it was better to let me work through whatever was brewing in my mind. Over the next 3 days, I organized my evidence methodically. I created a secure folder on an encrypted drive and began documenting everything I knew about the Pinnacle merger, the irregular communications, the undisclosed personal payments, the conflicts of interest, the timeline of events that led to my termination. But I didn't act immediately. That would have been emotional, reactive. Instead, I did something Richard never expected. I waited and watched. On Monday morning, exactly 1 week after my termination, I received a call from Janet Morrison, Pinnacle Tech CFO. "Marcus, I hope you don't mind me calling your personal number," she said. "I got it from your business card. I heard about what happened at Stanton and Cole, and I wanted to reach out." "I appreciate that, Janet. How are things progressing with the merger?" "That's actually why I'm calling." Her voice sounded strained. "We've hit some complications in the final review process. There are some documentation gaps that nobody seems able to address. Richard keeps assuring us everything is fine, but my team is getting nervous." I smiled. "What kind of documentation gaps?" "Compliance records, regulatory filings, some financial reconciliation reports that were supposed to be part of the due diligence package, the items you usually handled. Richard says he's bringing in external consultants to fill the gaps, but it's already been 5 days and we haven't seen any progress." "That sounds frustrating." "It is, Marcus. I know this might be awkward given your situation, but would you be willing to meet with me? Off the record, I'd value your perspective on how to move forward." We met that Wednesday afternoon at a Starbucks in downtown Austin. I'd flown down on Southwest Airlines, coach this time, pay my own way. Janet looked tired, stressed in a way I'd never seen during our previous interactions. "The merger is supposed to close next Monday," she said after ordering her second espresso. "But we're missing critical pieces of documentation." When I ask Richard about it, he either changes the subject or tells me not to worry about minor technicalities. "What does your legal team say?" "They're recommending we delay the closing until everything is properly documented, but Richard is pushing hard for us to proceed as scheduled. He says any delay could jeopardize the entire deal." I nodded thoughtfully. "Janet, can I ask you something? Have you had any direct communication with Richard outside of official channels? Personal phone calls, text messages, anything like that?" Her expression changed. "Why would you ask that?" "Just curious about his communication style these days." She studied my face for a long moment. "Marcus, is there something I should know?" This was the moment. I could have told her everything right then. about Richard's personal financial incentives, about his brother-in-law's involvement, about the systematic elimination of anyone who might raise uncomfortable questions. But that would have been too direct, too obvious. Instead, I chose a different approach. Janet, in my 19 years at Stanton & Cole, I've learned that when someone is unusually eager to rush through complex processes, it's worth asking why. What's the hurry? Richard says market conditions might change if we wait too long. Market conditions for a software merger in July 2024? I raised an eyebrow. The tech sector has been stable for months. What specific conditions is he concerned about? She didn't have an answer, but I could see the wheels turning in her head. Marcus, hypothetically speaking, if someone wanted to verify the integrity of the due diligence process, what would they look for? Hypothetically, I'd want to see all communications between the parties, email threads, recorded calls, meeting transcripts. I'd want to understand if everyone involved has properly disclosed any personal financial interests in the outcome. And I want to know if any key personnel were removed from the process at critical moments and why. Her coffee cup stopped halfway to her lips. Removed how? Well, imagine if someone who knew all the details of the deal suddenly wasn't available to answer questions during the final review process. That might be worth investigating. We talked for another hour. I didn't accuse anyone of anything. I didn't reveal any specific information. I simply asked questions that any experienced CFO would want answers to. By the time we shook hands outside the Starbucks, Janet had a very different look in her eyes. "Thank you for your time, Marcus," she said. "This has been enlightening. I'm always happy to help." That evening, I flew back to Chicago and waited. I didn't have to wait long. On Thursday morning, my phone rang. It was Patricia Wells, Richard's assistant. "Marcus, Mr. Halverson would like to speak with you. Are you available for a call this afternoon?" "Of course," I said. "What time works for him?" "He'd prefer to meet in person. Could you come to the office around 2 p.m.? Interesting. A face-to-face meeting meant Richard was either very angry or very worried. Possibly both. I arrived at Stanton & Cole at exactly 2 p.m., wearing the same navy blue suit I'd worn to hundreds of client meetings over the years. Dave Martinez nodded at me from the security desk, but looked confused about why I was there. Patricia escorted me to Richard's office. He was standing by his window, looking out at the Chicago skyline. When he turned around, I could see the stress etched on his face. His usually perfect hair was slightly disheveled, and his expensive suit couldn't hide the tension in his shoulders. "Marcus, thank you for coming in." His voice was carefully controlled, but I could hear the strain underneath. "No problem. What can I do for you? I understand you had coffee with Janet Morrison yesterday." There it was. Someone had told him about our meeting. I wasn't surprised. In corporate deals this size, information travels fast. I confirmed. She reached out to me. We've worked together for months, so it seemed natural for her to want to discuss the transition. "What did you discuss?" I pretended to think about it. She mentioned some documentation concerns, gaps in the due diligence package. She seemed stressed about the timeline. Richard's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "And what did you tell her?" I told her that these kinds of issues are normal in complex mergers. I suggested she work with the current team to resolve any concerns. He relaxed slightly. "Good. That's good advice." But then I added, I did mention that if she had specific questions about documentation I'd prepared over the past few months, she might want to request access to all the original files, just to ensure nothing was missed in the transition. The color drained from Richard's face. He stared at me for what felt like an eternity. I could practically hear the gears grinding in his head as he processed what I just said. Access to all the original files. He knew exactly what that meant. "Marcus, I think there may have been a misunderstanding about your termination," he said finally, attempting to regain his composure. "Perhaps we acted too hastily. The company could benefit from your continued involvement in the Pinnacle merger." "Really? Last week, you told me the board wanted fresh perspectives." "Yes, well, the board has reconsidered. We'd like to offer you a consulting position. Same salary, full benefits, just until the merger closes." I pretended to think about it. "That's generous, Richard, but I'm not sure I'm the right fit anymore." "Of course you are. You know this deal better than anyone." His voice had taken on a desperate edge. "Name your price." "It's not about money. Then what? What do you want? I looked him straight in the eye. I want the truth. His face went pale again. I don't know what you mean. I think you do. We stared at each other across his mahogany desk. In that moment, I think he realized that I knew everything about the personal payments, about his brother-in-law, about the real reason for my termination. Marcus, whatever you think you know. My phone rang, interrupting him. It was Janet Morrison. Excuse me, I said to Richard, then answered the call. Hi, Janet. Marcus, I'm sorry to bother you, but we need to talk urgently. Can you meet me tomorrow morning? I have some questions about the documentation you mentioned. Of course. What time? 8 a.m. at our Austin office. I'll be there. I hung up and looked at Richard. He was gripping the edge of his desk, so tightly his knuckles had turned white. That was Janet Morrison, I said casually. She wants to discuss some documentation issues. Apparently, the gaps are bigger than initially thought. Richard stood up abruptly. Marcus, I need you to understand something. This merger is critical for everyone at this company. If it falls through, we'll have to lay off 30% of our staff. Good people will lose their jobs. That would be unfortunate. These are people with families, mortgages, kids in college. Don't let your personal feelings about me hurt innocent people. I stood up as well. Richard, I've never let personal feelings interfere with business decisions. That's the difference between us. I walked toward the door, then paused. Oh, and Richard, you might want to prepare some answers for Janet's questions. She strikes me as the thorough type. I left him standing there in his office, probably calculating how quickly his world was about to collapse. The next morning, I flew to Austin for what turned out to be the most satisfying meeting of my career. Janet had assembled her entire legal and finance team in Pinnacle Tech's largest conference room. The walls were lined with whiteboards covered in deal timelines and financial projections. Marcus, thank you for coming, Janet said as I entered. After our conversation on Wednesday, my team did some additional research into the merger documentation. We discovered some concerning inconsistencies. For the next 3 hours, I answered their questions with complete honesty and transparency. I walked them through every aspect of the due diligence process, explained the significance of missing documents, and provided context for communications they'd found confusing. When they asked about conflicts of interest, I told them about Richard's undisclosed personal financial incentives. When they asked about the timeline for my termination, I explained how it coincided with their final review requests. When they asked if I had documentation to support my statements, I told them I'd be happy to provide whatever they needed. By noon, Janet's team had made their decision. We're postponing the merger indefinitely, Janet announced, pending a full investigation into the circumstances surrounding this deal. I flew back to Chicago that afternoon, feeling lighter than I had in years. My phone was buzzing constantly with calls from Richard, Patricia, and even some board members, but I didn't answer. There was nothing left to discuss. The story broke in the Chicago Business Journal the following Tuesday. Stanton and Cole CEO under investigation for merger fraud. The article detailed the undisclosed conflicts of interest, the suspicious timing of key personnel changes, and the documentation irregularities that had derailed the billion-dollar deal. By the end of that week, Richard had been terminated by the board and was facing SEC investigations. The merger with Pinnacle Tech was officially canceled. Stanton and Cole's stock price dropped 40%, and the company was forced to lay off 60 employees. But here's the interesting part. Pinnacle Tech offered me a position as their director of strategic acquisitions. My starting salary was $310,000, plus a signing bonus of $85,000. They wanted someone with integrity to lead their future merger activities. I accepted. On my first day at Pinnacle Tech in early August 2024, I received an email from Patricia Wells. She'd been let go when Stanton and Cole downsized, but she found a new job with a smaller consulting firm. Her message was brief. Mr. Ellington, I wanted you to know that I never felt right about sending that termination email. I'm glad things worked out for you. You always treated everyone with respect, regardless of their position. That's rare in corporate America. I replied with a simple, "Thank you, Patricia. I wish you all the best in your new role." 2 weeks later, I ran into Dave Martinez, the security guard from Stanton and Cole, at a Cubs game. He'd found work at a downtown law firm and seemed happy. Mr. Ellington, he called out as I walked past his section. How are you doing? Great, Dave. How about you? Can't complain. He leaned closer and lowered his voice. Between you and me, I heard about what happened with Mr. Halverson and all that business. Crazy stuff. It was certainly unexpected. Between you and me, a lot of us saw it coming. Guy always acted like he was better than everyone else. But you always remember my grandson's name, asked about his games. That says something about a person's character. I smiled. Thanks, Dave. That means a lot. As I walked back to my seat, I thought about the past month. I'd learned that sometimes the best revenge isn't planning elaborate schemes or public humiliation. Sometimes it's simply allowing the truth to surface naturally. Sometimes it's maintaining your integrity while others destroy themselves with their own greed and dishonesty. Richard had fired me because he saw me as an obstacle to his personal enrichment. He thought eliminating me would clear his path to a $2.1 million payday. Instead, he'd removed the one person who might have helped him navigate the legitimate concerns that eventually sank the deal. His own actions had been his downfall. I just helped shine a light on them. These days, I sleep better at night. I work for a company that values ethics and transparency. My wife, Sarah, says I seem happier, more relaxed. My daughter, Emma, now 16, told me she's proud of how I handled all that drama at your old job. Richard, from what I hear, is working for a small consulting firm in Milwaukee, making less than half his former salary. The SEC investigation resulted in fines and professional sanctions that effectively ended his corporate career. I don't take pleasure in his misfortune, but I also don't regret the choices I made. In business, as in life, integrity isn't just about doing the right thing when people are watching. It's about building a foundation strong enough to support you when everything else falls apart. My 19 years at Stanton and Cole had taught me that lesson, even if I didn't realize it at the time. The truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how deeply people try to bury it. And when it does, you want to be standing on solid ground. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video and leave a comment telling me what you thought. And if you're not already subscribed to the channel, please subscribe and hit the notification bell to get alerts about new stories like this one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.